Yeah, so thanks for being here, everybody, and welcome back to the ongoing Lunch and Learn series hosted by the Affordable Housing Consortium. Yeah, I hope that you're ready for fall. I'm ready for fall, reluctantly, but I'm ready for it. Um, I love fall out here so much. So yeah, hope that you've had a good summer and ready to jump back into some really cool content. So if this is your first time to one of our Lunch and Learns, welcome. The Affordable Housing Consortium hosts these virtual events throughout the year, focused on housing topics and topics within cross-section of housing. So today we're gonna dive into trees and some conversation around trees and housing and what's the Tree Foundation doing? So yeah, for today's event, we're gonna welcome Lowell Wyse, Executive Director for the Tacoma Tree Foundation. And he's gonna speak about what the Tree Foundation is doing, what they're doing to preserve and encourage tree planting and maintenance within the city of Tacoma, and how their goals are seeking to lead Tacoma towards a healthy and equitable urban forest. So really cool discussion, lots of tree policy and housing policy going on right now. So I'm hoping for some cool discussion and some cool questions. This is really relevant. It's going on right now. So we're excited to have this conversation. Really glad Lowell is willing and interested to pop into this room and share what he knows. So really quickly before I introduce Lowell and we dive in, let me briefly introduce myself and the consortium. So my name is Casey Twiggs. I'm the membership coordinator for the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium. Um, we are a nonprofit membership-based agency that provides public education and advocacy and support for the expansion of affordable housing throughout Pierce County. One of the ways that we do that is by hosting these public events, Lunch and Learns. We also host other special meetings around certain types of topics about development or other topics within housing. We educate the public. We also collect data to share with local representatives. And we advocate at the state and local level as well for policies and funding to support more affordable housing and to bolster the work of our really great members. So altogether, we have about 75 members. Those members range from developers, consultants, financiers, construction companies, and anyone in between that's focused on housing or anything touching housing, along with individual members as well that just are think that these topics are important. And yeah, so we recognize the solutions to our community's issues require collaborative efforts, collaborative input from across multiple different sectors. And the consortium is always trying to actively work with and learn from other agencies, including transit, public health, Black home ownership, equity, education, higher education, all those kinds of things. And today we're excited for a presentation and discussion about tree planting, housing. Those two, like I just said, have been really big topics, especially with home in Tacoma. And we're really excited to learn what the Tacoma Tree Foundation is doing, what they do all throughout the year with their programs, what their conversations are around trees and housing right now. And yeah, really excited for that. So um, let me go ahead and introduce our presenter today. So an English professor turned urban advocate or for urban forest advocate, Lowell Wyse, PhD, became the executive director of Tacoma Tree Foundation in 2021. For over a decade, he taught college writing, literature, and environmental humanities, all focused on the many ways that social and environmental issues overlap. They absolutely do. And he's deeply motivated by the values of community, justice, the stewardship, resilience, storytelling, and placemaking. So Lowell lives and works downtown Tacoma within the Puyallup territory and also is on the Sustainable Tacoma Commission in his spare time. We are on that commission together. Um, and I love it. So yeah, really, really quickly before we officially get started, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. If you've got some questions or comments or anything between now and when we have the comment period, the questions and answer period, just kind of, if you can write them in the chat, you're welcome to write them in the chat, or just hold them until we have that period to all kind of ask questions and discussion. And yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Lowell, I'm gonna pass it along to you.
Thanks so much, Casey. Thanks for the invitation. Great to see everyone on here. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to learn about connections between housing and trees. Glad to see a few familiar names and faces in the room. And I'm going to share my screen now and get right into this. All right. So as Casey mentioned, I'm with the Tacoma Tree Foundation. We are your local urban forestry nonprofit. And I'll be talking a little bit about all the different things that we do as a nonprofit today, but especially want to focus on what's relevant to this audience and the issue of housing affordability and how trees intersect with that issue. So we talk a lot about our work as growing trees and community. And I'll say a little bit more about what that means for us, but we literally plant trees in Tacoma. And we also work hand in hand with residents to improve their neighborhoods, to add greenery and vegetation to Tacoma's landscape. And in the process, we get to have a lot of fun and we get to meet a lot of different people with all different backgrounds. So I am really happy to be representing the Tree Foundation and sharing about what we do. I wanted to start off with this article, which came out on Tuesday, that the title of which really frames up the conversation, I think, today. Excuse me one second. Sorry about that. So the News Tribune came out with this piece on Tuesday because on Tuesday night, the city council had a public hearing about home in Tacoma, which has to do with the rezoning of Tacoma's residential areas. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. But the story that they were getting at on Tuesday was this issue of how the redesign of Tacoma's residential areas intersects with the issue of trees in the community. So I loved this headline from the News Tribune and how they were asking the question about affordability and housing and tree protections, because these things are a lot more connected than everybody realizes. So I'm going to come back to this specific issue, especially about home in Tacoma, for the end of the conversation today. But I want to start off by just familiarizing you with what we do at the Tree Foundation. And then I plan to leave lots of time for questions at the end. Everyone has tree questions and tree stories. I welcome all of it. But I think especially today, we're focused on this nexus between housing and trees. So let's get going. Here's a picture of some of my team members. Our mission at the Tree Foundation is educating, empowering, and supporting community greening efforts in the greater Tacoma area. We are a nonprofit organization, and we are here on Puyallup territory in downtown Tacoma. So I want to start off by talking about tree benefits, and I've got a few of them listed here, but really, trees are part of our essential infrastructure in a city. They are doing obvious things like providing oxygen and making our neighborhoods more beautiful, but they're also doing a lot of work under the surface, like filtering air pollution. Like the leaves on a tree can filter fine particle pollution that comes out of our vehicles. They are also essential in slowing down stormwater from going into Puget Sound. And the number one pollution source in Puget Sound that harms salmon and orcas and other species is urban stormwater runoff. So trees help intercept that runoff and keep Puget Sound clean. So they're really important for all these many reasons. Another one is just shade and cooling. And with the way the climate is changing and the way that summer heat is operating, um, in neighborhoods where there aren't as many trees, people are a little bit more vulnerable to heat, illness, and death. And so those are just some of the main reasons that we care about trees and we want to have more of them in Tacoma. So I do a lot of walking in Tacoma, and I actually live between downtown and the Lincoln District. So on my walks, I like to pay attention to the landscape and how it looks. And I took this photo because I thought it was an example of a nice landscape, right? There's some large trees, there's some flowers and interest catches your eye as you walk past. Um, and I could tell too that this person invested a lot of time and money probably in landscaping, whoever is managing the property here. But it has a good feeling when you walk by, and that's a benefit to the whole community, right? Like how it feels to be just walking and be a part of the landscape. And then I've got a contrast for you. So here's another landscape close to my house, and this one has so much pavement, and the pavement is really causing a lot of problems for the environment. So pavement, unlike trees, actually absorbs heat and then holds onto it and reflects it throughout the day. So an area with more pavement is likely to be hotter than an area with uh, less pavement and more trees. It also has the effect of making sure all that stormwater and the pollution from our cars goes right down into the ocean. And so, in general, we want to make a shift from landscapes that look like this to landscapes that have more green benefits. You can see on the left an example of a street that has big mature trees, and on the right, a street that lacks trees. And you can imagine the difference in how it feels to be in one neighborhood or the other. Neighborhoods with low tree canopy can be 10 to 15 degrees hotter on a hot day than a neighborhood like the one we see on the left that has invested in trees over the course of many decades and even generations. So this is partly due to our history in Tacoma, but if you go way back in time, Tacoma was marketing itself as the lumber capital of the world. And this area was naturally a forest. So if you imagine Tacoma 100 years ago, much more of the landscape looked similar to Point Defiance. We had large old growth trees, and gradually those trees were almost all logged off and sold. So that was the industry that made Tacoma the city that it has become today. The combination of logging and railroads to harvest the natural resource and then export it. That was what built Tacoma. So, in some ways, I think it's important to just recognize this as part of our environmental history and think about the impacts that that has had over time. And I would argue that we're in the process of a shift in mindset and a shift in culture where we are recognizing that our lack of trees is a problem and we need to shift more toward stewardship and how can we regrow some of the forests that used to be here. In the broad scheme of things, Washington State and Pierce County are both losing trees at a really rapid rate. A couple of years ago, the Department of Natural Resources announced that Washington, the evergreen state, had crossed over to under 50% tree canopy for the first time in our history. And in Pierce County, a lot of the deforestation that's going on is due to suburban sprawl and kind of our cities climbing closer and closer up toward the mountains. And so it's a big issue about land use and a question of as our population grows, how can we grow in a way that's smart, that allows people to live more sustainably. And part of that solution is having densely populated neighborhoods that are also surrounded by green amenities. So this is a statewide issue, and the work that we do in Tacoma is, I would say, um, yeah, it's really important not only locally but statewide for how we are thinking about the urban forest and how we can kind of recover from a century or more of kind of tree cutting as opposed to tree planting. So the situation that we're in is that Tacoma is in last place of any major city that has measured tree canopy in Western Washington. So 20% of our land area is covered with trees and vegetation. And you can see from this chart that lags behind even a place like Seattle that has much higher population, more development pressure, and so on. So we've got a lot of work to do. We're in last place, and that's one of the reasons that Tacoma Tree Foundation was created, is to get the community involved and be a part of the solution for how we can start to grow the urban forests and reverse the decline that we've seen in the past several years. Um, if you look at this chart, this is based on some work that we did last year to understand Pierce County communities. And you can see Tacoma and Fife are in last place in Pierce County as well. And so different communities have different resources and are looking at tree issues differently. But Tacoma is kind of unique in being the largest community in the county, the oldest community in some ways, and also having kind of the lowest tree canopy. So not only do we have the lowest tree canopy, but we also have an issue with how those trees are distributed. And long story short, I call this Tacoma's unfair forest because we have a disparity between um, communities that have higher equity and opportunity also have basically double the tree canopy that other neighborhoods have. So it's more than a 50% difference. So on this map, the green dots are trees essentially, and the white background has to do with the city's equity map. And where there's higher equity and opportunity, we see more tree canopy. And the areas in gray are neighborhoods like where I live that has a low tree canopy, higher percentage of pavement, and also more people living with poverty, people, more racial and ethnic diversity in South and East Tacoma and Hilltop as well. And so this is a big equity and environmental justice issue when it comes to how our physical environment is operating and who it's benefiting. So all those issues together, we have come to talk about as tree equity. And tree equity to me just means recognizing that trees have incredible benefits for our physical environment, but also for our human well-being in a city. They're an essential part of our infrastructure as a city. And it's really important that more and more people have access to those green benefits. So that's the vision, I would say, is a city where trees are distributed equitably and everybody has equal access to those benefits. So for people that are really interested in this issue, there's actually a resource from a group called American Forests, and it's called the Tree Equity Score. And so you can look on this map and it breaks down every census block in every urban area across the United States. And it shows how your neighborhood is compared to other neighborhoods surrounding it. So the greener it is, the higher the tree equity score. And I think it's more orange where it's like a low tree equity neighborhood. This is great because we have this data and that informs how we know where trees will make the most difference when we have our tree planting programs. So we use tools like this to understand where to put our energy as a nonprofit, and we're really focusing on this equity issue. And when we offer trees for planting, we tend to do that in the neighborhoods that need the trees the most, according to all these different measurements. So the question for Tacoma is whether we're at a turning point. And I think that the city of Tacoma is about to release another round of data. to gather this data, they do a flyover with a plane, and they use a radar technology that gives them a lot of interesting information about where the trees are located, including like the height of trees and apparently now the health of trees. So we'll have an update on how we're doing. But I would expect to see a further decline in our tree canopy, if not just a flatlining kind of no net loss situation for our trees. So this is a real question. Are we actually starting to preserve and grow the urban forest, or are we still losing trees that are cut down through different processes? But development is certainly one of those processes. So for us, when it comes to moving toward tree equity, we've got several components, and one is our tree planting program. So we're spending resources bringing trees to community members in these high priority areas. And for the most part, we just give away trees to residential property owners. And we're partnering with various local governments like City of Tacoma and Pierce County and Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department to do this work. We also have a robust education program that includes workshops and presentations from local experts, but also in-person experiences like tree walks. And some of our tree walks involve a mindfulness component where we're thinking about people's mental health and de-stressing with trees. And we also are able to offer some of those in a bilingual format where we've got English and Spanish speakers sharing about the mindfulness and the forest connection. So we also have a program called the Climate Leadership Cohort that we work with the city and county on, and we're training local folks on how to take climate action in the community. So really proud of the ways that we built out planting and education in the first 6 years of our existence. The final piece of this puzzle is policy and advocacy. And I would say that kind of intersects with what we're talking about today, which is how are the policies that our local governments have impacting the amount of tree coverage that we have in neighborhoods. And there's a whole variety of challenges in this area, but suffice it to say that we cannot plant trees fast enough to reach the city's goals for tree canopy due to all the trees that are cut down all the time across Tacoma. And that is a big issue. Many trees that have a tree canopy goal, like Tacoma does, have some policies in place that make it a little bit harder to cut down a tree unnecessarily and maybe provide incentives for people that are going to add trees to the landscape. So we are here as a resource for people to get some more understanding around these issues, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done at the city level to bring our tree policies into the 21st century. So that's an area that's especially important for the that goal of actually starting to grow the tree canopy, but we're not quite there yet. The fourth bullet that I have on here is kind of a X factor, and it's called social cohesion. And it's a little bit like I mentioned at the beginning, how we talk about growing trees and community. There's some scientific research that I find really compelling that connects the amount of social cohesion that a neighborhood has with the amount of tree canopy coverage that it has. So essentially, the more trees there are, the more people report feeling safe and feeling connected. And I think that's really interesting and really important for how we talk about what trees are doing for us in the city. On top of that, we also know that when people get involved in designing their neighborhoods and planting trees, they tend to feel more connected to each other. So when people get involved in a neighborhood tree planting, they get to meet their neighbors. They get to work together, and they're doing something hand in hand that's going to benefit them directly. I had this experience for the first time 3 years ago when I organized my neighbors to plant trees on our street. And I can tell you that it's true from my perspective that I feel closer to the neighbors that I worked with. There were people that came out of their houses who didn't even know that we were planting trees that just decided to come help because they saw something fun was happening and we were improving the block. So that's what I mean by social cohesion. And that's where we see some kind of intangible benefits for the Tacoma area throughout our education and planting programs. So here's just an example of what a tree walk looks like. This was from last fall in Lincoln Park in the South End. Obviously a beautiful, beautiful day to be taking in some trees. And then here's kind of what a tree planting looks like. We have a whole group of amazing volunteers that are at the ready when we can line up trees to plant and work with homeowners to get permission. Um, we are able to send out a team of volunteers and give that planting assistance for those that need it. So that's a really exciting program that we're able to offer. We can't always physically plant the tree, but we're finding more and more ways to add planting assistance to our services that we can offer. And then the third thing, as I mentioned, policy and advocacy, just sharing about the importance of trees in our community and doing everything that we can to make sure that we have good policies in place and have more trees in the future. So there's lots more that could be said about any of these components, and I'll welcome some questions, but I also want to share first about the connection with housing. And I'll share this piece quickly, but one of my good friends, Luke, who's on the board of the Tree Foundation also, bought this house a few years ago in Hilltop. And he wanted to change how the landscape looked and not just have grass that he had to mow. He also happens to be a landscape architect, so he had some tricks up his sleeve. But as of this spring, his front area looked like this. So he planted native oak trees and also wildflowers and transformed the planting area by the sidewalk and the street into something completely different that benefits birds and insects and other critters that frequent our city. Um, and it's just an example of what people can do when they have some knowledge and some resources to make Tacoma more beautiful and interesting, I would say. So part of what I want to talk about today was home in Tacoma and what this whole kind of rezoning process means for trees across the city. And I will start just kind of at a basic level and say that the home in Tacoma process did something fantastic, which was to eliminate single family zoning and make it possible to build other types of housing across Tacoma's neighborhoods that for 70 years or so were sort of frozen in time, right? It was prohibited to build anything except a single family house for about 70 years. That I would argue is one of the reasons that we have the high cost of housing that we do. It's part of that issue, right? And so Home in Tacoma is actually part of the city's affordable housing action strategy, where they realize that there's a big supply issue. And if we can grow the supply of homes, we can hopefully start to bring down the cost of housing. That's not my expertise per se. You all probably know more about that than I do, but I know that supply is a big issue. Um, the way that it intersects with trees is that currently there's no protection for trees on private property. So if you imagine a developer comes in and decides to tear down a single family home and build larger structures like a duplex or a triplex or up to, I think, 6 housing units in most of these neighborhoods. Um, the current standards would allow them to build out all the way to the sidewalk, to the very edge of the property, and not leave any room for trees. So you see this in neighborhoods like downtown that have already been upzoned. So like where I live, there are really big apartments going up, and they don't have to make any space for trees on the private property. So it's this question of how can we grow trees and also grow more housing at the same time? And what's the right balance when it comes to these residential lots for having some green amenities, but also adding housing units so that we can um, start to catch up with the demand that we see for homes across Tacoma area. So that's what Home in Tacoma is trying to get at is what's the right balance of housing and trees and how can we get out of this cycle where large trees are being cut down all the time to make space for buildings and parking lots. And um, one of the reasons that Home in Tacoma matters so much is these formerly single family residential areas um, represent about 50% of our land area in Tacoma. And they also represent the biggest chunk of land that is appropriate for having trees. Many homes, as I've been talking about, many homes don't have tree coverage on the property. And there's a lot of space where if we need to plant more trees, which we do to meet our tree goals, um, we're going to need some of the space that is being talked about through the Home in Tacoma process. So 50% of the land area is this area that's being rezoned, and the proposal right now is to have some design standards that include landscaping for new developments in these areas. And Tacoma Tree Foundation supports the current package that the City Council is looking at. Um, it's not a proposal that's going to make every tree person happy because some tree people out there say that we shouldn't build, you shouldn't cut down a tree for any reason. Um, I think in some cases, a house is more valuable than a tree, especially given the affordability crisis that we have right now. But to say that developers should be allowed to build, uh, you know, all the homes, all the buildings without thinking about the impact it has for the environment, I think is a mistake too. So Home in Tacoma is trying to get that balance right, and I'm happy to talk more about the ins and outs of that as folks have questions. But yeah, so I want to open up for discussion and this question of how can we kind of address at the same time the urban forest crisis that we have and the housing affordability crisis. So I think I'll leave it there and open it up for questions.
Thanks so much, Lowell. That was really well put together. And you explained the background and the layout of the conversation very, very well. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so this is the time for you guys to ask some questions. Does anybody have anything jumping out at them at the moment? You can throw your question into the chat. You can raise your hand. You can just unmute yourself and talking to us. It's completely up to you. This is just kind of a Q&A opportunity. I'll pause.
I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Tiffany Williams. I'm from the University of Puget Sound. Sorry, I thought my camera was going to work there. I think I got to change it to not the one on my laptop. There we go. Okay. Hi. So my role at University of Puget Sound is trying to get students out in the community, partnering in ways that they find interesting, where they can, participate in a mutually beneficial relationship where they're learning something, but also giving back. And we have a lot of students who are really passionate about environmentalism. So I'm just wondering, for our students or for anyone else who works with individuals who might, be interested in getting involved more, what would that look like? What opportunities are there to help if it's something you're also passionate about?
Yeah, thank you. Well, right now we have an immediate need for volunteers for the fall planting season. We did our first tree planting event of the season yesterday, and we'll be going basically for the next 6 months. There will be different opportunities to help us plant trees. And apart from that, we also have lots of educational activities. So I would direct everyone to our webpage, which I'll share here in the chat. And you can see just exactly what we have going on. And sometimes it may be just like a presentation that you would sign up to go to or a walk, but there's also specifically volunteer opportunities. So I'll stop sharing so I can find the Zoom chat and send a couple links. We've done a few things with UPS in the past. I know we've done some tree walks on campus to celebrate the amazing trees that you all have up there. And I've also spoken with some classes on environmental justice in Tacoma and the connection with urban forestry. So thanks for the question.
Denise, I see you waving. Yeah, you got a question?
Yes, I do. I'm a council
What?
member for the city of University Place, and I'm very interested in growing our tree canopy, especially in the north end of our city, because I think that's where it's lacking. And I noticed on one of your maps that's kind of indicative to my thoughts without doing the official research behind it. And so we have a tree policy in place, and we're trying to green as many of the public corridors as we can. But one of our issues that we're having is the maintenance and the replacement of the trees. Trying to gather a policy for that as we further grow the trees. Or we're currently now trying to understand, we're getting a mandate from the EPA saying that they would like to have us account for the tree canopies that we have existing in our city. And so one fold of my question that I would like more information on is a policy for the maintenance and replacement of the trees to keep those numbers going. The other question I have is that in the winter, we lose a lot of our tree canopy because of the deciduous trees. And so that's a concern because UP becomes one of the cities that has a little more than less healthy air quality. And so when you do the tree canopy count, I believe you should do it in the winter to get the accurate account of where you should grow more of the trees that are more evergreen, but trees that are evergreen that will not be intrusive or destructive to the current infrastructure. So how would you go about doing those things?
Well, thank you for those questions. I want to commend you. University Place actually has some of the best tree policies in the county. And among other things, my understanding is that UP is actually doing some maintenance on street trees, which is not the case in the city of Tacoma. So the proactive planting and maintenance is something that you're doing well. I think what you're referring to with the EPA thing is actually a state of Washington requirement now for the stormwater permitting,
Yes,
where cities are being asked for the first time to report on tree canopy as a condition
correct.
of the stormwater
Right.
permit. So that's a big thing. And I would say, I think that the Department of Natural Resources is going to try to come out with some code recommendations or some other recommendations related to how cities go about that count. So I can connect you to some of those resources later on. I'll leave my email here in the chat, and
Okay.
anyone is welcome to reach out. I'm also putting a bunch of links in the chat for those that are interested in following some links. But
Okay.
yeah, thank you for that question.
All right. Well, thank you for the resource. I appreciate all the efforts that you do to green up Tacoma. And maybe that'll
Yeah,
extend into UP.
yes, and I think that I didn't answer one of your questions, which is about the seasonality and trees losing their leaves.
Yeah.
But you are right that it affects the amount of shade, affects the air quality, and one of the added benefits of evergreen trees is that they're kind of doing that work all year round, whereas the trees with their leaves are not involved in filtering pollution when they don't have leaves.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lowell.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Carla, I see your hand. And then I see in the chat we had a few minutes ago, Marilee, I hope I'm saying your name right, had a question about adding more trees. Lowell, can you speak to what the update's talking about in terms of adding more trees to the downtown core? That might be more of a planning person question, but I know that you studied this plan in terms of trees very deeply.
Yeah, so in general, home in Tacoma is really about the areas that are not in the downtown core or not in the business districts because it's what was single family residential. So the areas that are more for commercial purposes or industrial purposes aren't being changed under the new rules. But also those districts tend to have fewer trees. So like I live in downtown and I see this as a very big issue because my tree canopy is 7% in my neighborhood. And that's much lower than the average of 20%. And I live 2 blocks from Interstate 5. So the air quality where I live is not good. And I see this as an urgent issue for downtown and other parts of the city too. But we also have to go with where there's space to plant the trees. And then how are we making sure that they're taken care of so that they grow to mature size? How are we choosing the right species so they're not messing up sidewalks and doing other nasty things that we don't like? So yeah, it's a big issue, but home in Tacoma for now is not touching the commercial and downtown areas.
Thank you for that. We've got another question. Carla, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. You just touched on briefly what I was going to ask about was messing up sidewalks. I work in critical areas in the permitting in the city of Tacoma. We may have met. I deal a lot with the planting of trees, vegetation all over in critical areas and buffers. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind for planting along development strips when you border something like a sidewalk or other sorts of development is the critical root zone, both for the protection of the tree, for long-term survivability, and for long-term potential problems with lifting sidewalks and so forth. So I was wondering if you could just provide a little more in what your process is or what your thoughts were on, you said how you plant trees, where you plant them, keeping the critical root zone in mind.
Yeah, thank you. My answer to that is we lean on the city's urban forestry program for a lot of our recommendations. So we follow their lead and we partner with the city on our neighborhood street tree planting. So I think most issues with sidewalks can be addressed by choosing the right tree and planting it correctly. And usually when those two things happen, we don't see as many issues or conflicts with the infrastructure. But like you're talking about, the critical areas are already forested. And as I mentioned before, our natural landscape wants to be a forest. So we may have plants that volunteer kind of closer to the neighborhood infrastructure that don't want to stay in the critical areas. So if we're kind of keeping on top of that as a maintenance issue, I would say it might be about property owners pruning out saplings that are volunteering in the place where they shouldn't be, probably. The other thing I will say is that the city's urban forestry team is looking at that root volume question and actually requiring, with future tree planting along the street, looking at requiring a certain soil volume so that the trees have enough soil to survive in the kind of limited space that there is next to the street sidewalk.
Okay, great. That kind of answers it for me. Thanks.
Yeah. And Mike Carey is the person to talk to about that.
Awesome. Yeah, Mike does know his stuff as well. So I know that Lowell, you told me that you need to kind of scurry out of here around 12:50. We've all got. I appreciate people that are willing to present and show up at a lunch event. I really do appreciate you guys. I know it's not the most convenient time sometimes, but this has been really good, really great, Lowell. I think that you speak about this topic and the intersections of these topics really well. I think you, the Tree Foundation and the consortium were, on the same page about this kind of development, these development questions. I think the only thing that I'm going to add, it's not really a question, it's just some feedback that I've heard from my housing community partners and developers is, and I don't know if the Tree Foundation has the capacity for this, or if it's a combination of urban forestry, Tree Foundation, and maybe some other partners. But what I'm hearing from developers is they 100% want the trees, and it did talk about it in this article as well. The guy from Master Builders, but our people are also saying we just don't know what to plant. And I think that helping to bridge the gap of communication with them and you is something that we're working on, trying to figure out how to have those conversations more easily and get those trees planted, the right trees in the right way. Because as you know, that'll make it break it. You can plant the tree and it may not survive, or it may have to be torn down. You guys have that so much good information on that, and I know that I'm going to work on trying to get that gap connected a little bit more, because I think a lot of them just don't know what to do and they don't know how to ask.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the city urban forestry program is going to be the best for that kind of technical information. And there's like a list of tree species that are approved for planting along the street. And what's changing in home in Tacoma is requiring developers to plant trees on private property and requiring them to pay a fee if they cut a tree down that's a healthy tree. And so those are big changes for property owners to face, but it's kind of the necessary step that cities take when they have a goal of increasing tree coverage.
Yep. We got to do it somehow, right?
Yeah, and that's for me, it's about what's the future city going to look like? How are we going to make it more beautiful and a better place to live, regardless of what neighborhood you live in?
Absolutely. 100% agree. Well, I know that you need to scurry out, and I'm sure other people do too. And it looks like we don't have any other questions. Thank you everybody for showing up and with your questions. Georgette, people who deserve affordable housing also deserve to enjoy the benefits of tree canopy located next to their housing. Housing and trees are both important. I agree 100%. I'm glad that you shared that. And I think everybody in this room agrees to the most extent. So I appreciate you guys for being here. Keep a lookout for the presentation materials, the recording slides, all of the links and programs talked about throughout the event. And keep tuning into these events so that we can just keep sharing information. We really appreciate your continued support. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lowell. We'll be chatting soon.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks, everyone.